Hey everybody, it's Amanda, and it is time for our evening Bible study. I am very excited to be here tonight and talk to you. If you do not know, if you haven't been with us before, on these special days, Rick and I are doing the Bible study every weekend now, every Saturday and Sunday. And when we're doing the Bible study, normally it's the two of us, but once a month, he has one night a month that he has to work late and do some projects at work. And that is the night that I get to do the Bible study by myself, which is always, kind of stressful because I rely on Rick to be the talker. I'm just here to kind of read the Bible and put a little something here and there and help him to not go 3 hours long when he does the Bible study. Hey, girl. But tonight is my night. And I even posted on Instagram and I think posted Facebook about it, how I don't think it's an accident that today is my day and I am a woman by myself doing this Bible study. And even the Psalm that we just came to at this time, I think is a great Psalm. It's Psalm 21, and it's actually titled After the Battle. It's after a victory, which I think is relevant. So I'm going to take a few minutes like I always do, and I'm going to share the links if you guys would just be patient with me since I am by myself. And I'm going to let everybody know that we're here, that we're actually live. We're going to do the Bible study. As soon as I get the link shared, we'll read it, we'll talk about it. And I think it's going to be, a really good study. I really do. So if you just give me just a couple minutes to figure out what I'm doing, it's a whole lot easier when he's here to at least semi-talk. But, me by myself trying to type and talk at the same time is not always a winner. So let me just share these links. I do see a lot of you folks are popping into the chat, and I'm so glad you're here because I don't want to talk to myself. Let's see. We are on Saturday evening. I hope you all have had a restful Saturday. And you are excited to be in God's Word. I had an excellent Sabbath service this morning. Absolutely excellent. The preaching this morning was on David. We're going through the book of 2 Samuel, and obviously we just here in this Bible study finished 2 Samuel not too long ago. So it's neat to have someone else go over it, and it's still kind of fresh in my mind. And just to hear their perspective. But today he actually talked about strongholds, and it was such a good message. Just the idea that there are strongholds in your life that could be hindering you from serving the Lord. And, I really appreciate all of the things. There we go. I appreciate all of the things that he said about trying to break down strongholds. The idea of a stronghold is anything that's going to interfere with your ability to serve the Lord and be faithful to him. And he talked about things from anxiety, fear, to struggles that you would have with your own personal sin, things like that. So it was just a really good message. I got a lot out of it. And I hope you guys have just been enjoying your day. Again, I cannot talk and type at the same time, so I'm really trying to get this done so we can get started, but it's just going to take me 1 second. Yay, my mommy's here. Everybody say hi to Janie. A suburban hillbilly. I see she's got a prayer request about her mom, so make sure you're in prayer for her. Okay, and I have one more link to share and I'll be done. I think I usually say, come join us for our Bible study. And I think I started writing, come join us. And it's just me tonight. But I guess it's us because it's you guys too. So that's not weird. Okay. And there we go. Last post. And it's posted. Yay. All right. So with that being said, we're in Psalm 21. Like I said, it's titled After the Battle. And I'm going to read through it real fast and we're going to talk about it. And I think it's going to be a really great study. So, you ready? We are at Psalm 21. He's working, Mom. I said at the beginning, if you don't know where Rick is, Rick works late one night a month, and this is it. So, all right. But you know what? Tonight, when he gets off, we are going to go have some, we usually on the night that he works late, we usually go out and eat dinner. Like it's one of those things that we do. And we go to a nicer place. So tonight we're having a delicious Hispanic cuisine. So I'm so looking forward. In fact, Melissa, if you're still here, you ate there. That's one of our favorite places. So we're excited about that. So I'm, just excited. Oh, Carrie, we will pray for your husband too. All right. Psalm 21. I hope you got your Bible by now. We are going to start at verse 1. I'm reading through the whole thing. It's not very long. It's only 13 verses. So let's read through that. Okay. Psalm 21, starting verse 1, it says, "To the chief musician, a psalm of David. The king shall joy in thy strength, O Lord, and in thy salvation how greatly shall he rejoice. Thou hast given him his heart's desire, and hast not withholden the request of his lips. Selah. For thou preventest him with the blessings of goodness. Thou settest a crown of pure gold on his head. He asked life of thee, and thou gavest it him, even length of days forever and ever. His glory is great in thy salvation. Honor and majesty hast thou laid upon him. For thou hast made him most blessed forever. Thou hast made him exceeding glad with thy countenance. For the king trusteth in the Lord, and through the mercy of the Most High he shall not be moved. Thine hand shall find out all thine enemies. Thy right hand shall find out those that hate thee. Thou shalt make them as a fiery oven in the time of thine anger. The Lord shall swallow them up in his wrath, and the fire shall devour them. Their fruit shall thou destroy from the earth, and their seed from among the children of men. For they intended evil against thee. They imagined a mischievous device, which they are not able to perform. Therefore shalt thou make them turn their back, when thou shalt make ready thine arrows upon thy strings against the face of them. Be thou exalted, Lord, in thine own strength. So will we sing and praise thy power." Okay, so it's, like I said, really short psalm. And of course, since I'm not the talker, I don't know how long the Bible study is going to be, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I'm always going for an hour. I almost never do it, but 13 verses, we'll see what we can do. But here's what I do see. This psalm is divided really into two parts. You have the first part, which emphasizes the king and how after this battle, how he has been blessed and the Lord has given him his heart's desires, I guess, as it says. And the reason why is because this king is a king who rejoices in the Lord. And then the second part is about how God dealt with the enemies. And excuse me, so these two parts are very distinct, and they each have their own purpose. So we're going to start with the first part, which, like I said, emphasizes the king. And I think that's like verses 1 through 7. So we'll start at the beginning. A very good place to start. And it says, again, to the chief musician, a psalm of David. So David is writing this. David, having been in many battles, having been a king, having been, like an officer, I guess would be a way to put it, just a fighter, someone in the military out there fighting battles for another king. And so he's had this in the perspective of both sides, being someone who's serving in the military and someone who is actually the king leading them. And so he has just a very unique perspective. But this is his perspective, is coming home from battle, after this battle that they have in fact won. It says, "The king shall joy in thy strength, O Lord, and in thy salvation, how greatly shall he rejoice." So I think the key here, whenever we see the words like thy salvation, I think we always think of salvation in terms of our eternal salvation, which is excellent because many of these Psalms are also pointing to that. But I'm taking it just in terms of what David's talking about here, just very forthrightly, that they have been saved in this battle. Because if you've ever, I don't know how many of you guys have ever fought in any battles or been in the military, God's been really good to us that we have not really had very many wars. Not like in David's generation. In David's generation, it was war after war after war, and David was constantly in battle. We haven't necessarily had to live that way, most of us. But the idea is that um, the Lord has saved them, saved their life, preserved them in this battle. And of course, if you've been in a battle where you've been fighting for your life, and it says, how greatly shall he rejoice at the salvation? Well, of course, this is a long, hard, dangerous, fought battle that the Lord has given them a victory in. And of how greatly are you going to rejoice in that? I mean, you're going to rejoice tremendously. But it says the king will joy in thy strength, O Lord. And the idea is that this king, and this is what makes this king very distinct, very different, is that he recognizes that the reason why they have this victory is because of God and his strength. The Lord's strength is what gave them the victory, not their own. And I want to say it was the last psalm that we did. Let me just get back here and see if I can't find it. Yeah, that it was Psalm 20, verse 7 says, "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God." And it was this idea of this king who, rather than trusting in the Lord for his victory, was trusting in the strength of his own army, the strength of his own ability. And that was not going to bring them to a place of ultimate victory. They might win a couple of victories here and there, but they're not going to win the whole war. That you just can't win completely that way. You have to understand that it's the Lord who's the one leading this battle, and understand that the victory is his. So this particular king, this king who's had this battle, who's had this victory, he is rejoicing in the strength of God who had the ability to win the battle, and in their salvation, the idea that they have been saved, their life has been spared, and they are going to now move forward because God again has been good to them. So they're rejoicing. So again, I can't help it. I'm going to have to make parallels because I always try to bring it down to like our level. We're not necessarily kings. How is it relevant to us, right? And I couldn't help but when I was reading this, think about, the things that are in the news. And for me, it's not a political issue. I think it's an issue that, as believers, we certainly take to heart the idea of making sure that we choose life. And I've talked about it many, many times in this Bible study. Many times, there's many times in the Bible where people are killing children, and the Lord does not bless that nation, that king, that leadership, whatever. When children are being killed, it's not a place of blessing. And if I may be so bold to say, I just don't think the Lord is going to bless a nation who supports the killing of children. Now, am I saying that, and for those who are not aware, here in the US where we live, there had for a long time been a law that kind of guaranteed that anyone could kill their child essentially for any reason, and their unborn child, I should say. And it's something that we've been praying about for a long time. In fact, something that we've been praying about for so long that honestly, I'm gonna be totally honest with you. We've prayed about it, but I don't think that I actually had the kind of faith that would move any mountains, because I just never thought honestly it would change. I truly, and I'm really ashamed of it now, because I feel like my faith was so shallow. Like, God couldn't do that? Come on, God can do anything. But at the same time, I'm just being honest with you. To me, that felt like something that was immovable. And yet it burdened my heart because I just hate hearing about. I don't think that is the solution for everything. I don't. I think there are a lot of other things that need to be fixed. But I don't think the solution is ever going to be to kill children. And so I'm thankful that at least that has been removed, and we can now look to make better solutions for other things, if that makes sense. But to me, this was just a great, mighty battle that's been waging in our country for many, many years. That's certainly my whole lifetime, and I'm 44. And yet the Lord brought a victory. And it wasn't even one that I expected. Did any of you expect it? Because I didn't expect this. This kind of took me by surprise when it came. Um, but it's so amazing because, you see the king shall joy in the strength of the Lord. And I can't help but in this moment rejoice in the strength of the Lord and in the salvation and of so many lives, the idea that so many lives will be saved because of that, right? Um, so I don't I'm really excited. Can't help but rejoice in all of the things that um the Lord is doing that we don't even know about. You know what I mean? It's just amazing to see his great work. And battles going on behind the scenes that I'm not even aware of, you're not even aware of, and yet he is doing things to, save lives and do. And one thing I will say too, just a little side note. Just a little side note, I'm gonna throw it out there. Rick and I were talking about it yesterday, as was everybody. And I was thinking about all the times in the Bible where well, I first of all I thought about how it makes sense that Satan would want to destroy children because the very curse that we see in Genesis 3 is that the seed of woman would crush the head of Satan, right? And so you often see how there's this like prophecy or something where there's a child coming that's going to destroy something, and so then the king destroys all of the children. Pharaoh, of course, that wasn't a prophecy, but he saw the children of Israel were growing too large, too powerful. He felt like it was dangerous, so he ordered the destruction of all the children. And in doing so, the Lord raised up Moses, who then delivered the children out of that leadership. And then you think of later in the Bible how when Herod heard about Christ, and the wise men of the time told him about it, he destroyed all of the children. And even in the midst of that, Christ was still raised up. And Rick and I were saying, there's been Satan seeking to destroy so many children in our country, and perhaps the Lord is going to raise up a deliverer out of that. That's just subjection. But just the idea that, we do have an enemy who's seeking to destroy, and yet God does not desire to see people destroyed. He wants to see people saved. That was always his desire. That's in fact what the whole Bible is about, God and his redemption of man and how he wants to save them. But particularly those who love him, and those who trust him, those who follow him, he is constantly going to be on their side, and he's always on the side of the fatherless and the widows. Like he's on the side of children. So who couldn't be thankful for a God like that, who loves children and wants to care for them? I just think it's a beautiful thing. So the idea here, to me, I read this and I see it in the light of the headlines that the Lord is handling things behind the scenes, and of course, because he's saving, we can rejoice. Verse 2 says, "Thou hast given him his heart's desire, and has not withholden the request of his lips." And of course, the idea that the Lord has given this king his heart's desire and hasn't withholden anything that he's requested of him. And it even has this Selah, this pause, and think about that for a minute, how the Lord is on the side of this king who's trusted him, who's made request of him, even the idea that he's come to him in prayer. God has given him these things. And, part of that is that this king whose trust is in the Lord, his heart's desire is going to be for the Lord and be for godly things. If our heart's desire is for God's will, then obviously he's going to bless it. And if we go to him in prayer with those things, why would he withhold his will from us? Why would he withhold good things from us? He won't. And so, again, I feel like this is where I maybe have not had the faith that I thought I had, and that there are things that I thought would never be moved, but this has actually really increased my faith tremendously in that God can do so much that we aren't even thinking about, we aren't even striving for. I mean, honestly, I would have thought to change something like this in our country, we'd have had to do like major things, major marches, major all kinds of stuff. And yet here we are just sitting, going about our lives, and behind the scenes, the Lord is working. It's amazing to me. And so, but this is something that we've prayed about. I mean, we've prayed about it here on this channel. We've prayed about it in our personal lives. We've prayed about it in churches, and the Lord hasn't withholden it from us, because it's something that he cares about. Like I said, he cares about children. He cares about people. All of the people that he formed And we're gonna talk about that soon too. That's another psalm. The idea that he formed us, knit us together in our mother's womb, and he knew us in our inward parts. Like he knows every single thing about us. The idea that we're all uniquely created by him, and he knows each and every one of us. And what a beautiful thing that he cares about us so much. So, verse 3 says, "For thou preventest him with the blessings of goodness. Thou settest a crown of pure gold on his head." And when it says preventest, this is the King James Version, it's the idea that you came to greet him with rich blessings. So, this king is coming back from this battle, and God is there waiting for him. He's and the word preventest here, and let me roll into my Strongs because we got to have that. It even says you confronted him, you welcomed him, you went before him. The idea is that he's coming home from the battle and the Lord's waiting there in the road. He's like, hold up, before you get there, I got something for you. And it's the rich blessings, and he puts a crown of pure gold on his head. And the idea is that, the Lord is so excited about this victory, he just wants to continue to bless. This is a king who is following him, serving him, trusting him, praying to him. He's given him this victory, and he's like, and I want to bless you more. I want to do more. I want to give you the richest blessings, a crown of pure gold on his head. And so, like, sometimes you might get discouraged at the weight of the world, and then you see the Lord working and doing something miraculous, and you realize that he wants to bless us. He wants to do good. He wants to give us so much more than we can imagine or ask or think. And we have to get ourselves out of a place of thinking that, oh, this is too big. God can't do it. God can't change these circumstances. God can't do this. He can do anything. There's so many battles that we've read about as we've gone through, the Old Testament up through now, where the odds were against them. I mean, remember when we read about Gideon? It was like thousands of people against Gideon's like 100, and they didn't even have any weapons. Like they blew a trumpet. I mean, it's ridiculous odds, and yet they got the victory. And it happens over and over and over again where it doesn't make sense. And then God chooses those circumstances where it doesn't make sense so he can get the victory, which I got to be honest with you is why I talk about it on social media. Because I feel like, you know, this is such a big momentous thing, and it wasn't the workings of man, it was the working of God that we have to recognize. I almost feel like, that verse that talks about how, um, if you didn't say anything, the rocks would cry out. And I just feel like, you've got to say something. You've got to, if not, the rocks will cry out. Like God is working and he's doing big, amazing things. And he wants to bless us and bless people who trust him. And the idea is that, he is a loving God who wants good things for his people. Children are good things. Children are inherited unto the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. Interesting story on that verse in particular, and I'll just tell the story. I remember I shared my story on Instagram and Facebook about how I had children young, and as such, and not in great circumstances, and as such, I got a lot of flack, and I say that you know loosely. I say that very loosely. I was a young girl in bad circumstances, and everyone was encouraging me not to have my children. Every time I had a baby, every single time, I would say I was expecting, and people would say to me, "Not congratulations, but are you gonna have it?" That was like the first question, and isn't that sad? Isn't that a sad place? Um, but I had my children, all of them, and I'm really thankful that the Lord put that on my heart. I'm glad I don't have to bear the burden of choosing anything else. And all of my children, I love them and they're a blessing and they're wonderful. But I shared a little bit of that story. It wasn't easy. I mean, I had people, I had one person in particular who I love, who I thought loved me, who literally spit on me and called me a whore. Literally. Not to mention the people I dealt with in high school. So it was not easy. This was not an easy decision. A lot of people are like, "Well, you were held it so easy and you walked through life and, it wasn't easy. It wasn't an easy decision by any means, but it was still the right decision." And so, sometimes we have to deal with the consequences of our actions, and sometimes those consequences involve difficulty, but you still have to make the right decision, right? But because of my own circumstances, I have always had a real heart for young girls who were in bad situations. I've done jail ministry in jails with young girls who are in jails who've had children. And I've also done a lot of ministry with young teenage girls, and many of them had children. But there was one teenage girl in particular who was expecting, and she was going to a church, and the pastor and his wife at that church, they were unable to have children. And the pastor's wife was very bitter about her circumstances. In fact, I've told the story before about how she ended up leaving her husband and having an affair with somebody in the church. And just, it was very, very ugly, tore up the church, and it was very difficult. But at that time, she was still married to the pastor of the church, and there was a young teenage girl who was expecting. And everyone was putting pressure on that girl to not have baby, or if she was to have the baby, to give it over to that pastor and his wife, that would be better for the baby. And this girl was devastated because she really wanted to keep her baby. She wasn't even that young, really. I mean, she wasn't like a super young girl. I'm fairly certain she was 18, which I'm not saying that's not young, but it's not as young as some. But anyway, she was brokenhearted about it, and everyone was really making her feel like trash. And I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you are trying your best to make the best out of a difficult situation, and rather than people being there to support you and love you and encourage you, they make you feel like garbage. But that is where she was. And I really wanted to encourage her. I do think to this day that she would have been an excellent mom. But that's the Lord's business. And what ended up happening was she ended up miscarrying. And I can't say it, but I, perhaps even the stress of all of the pressure that everybody was putting on her put her in that situation where she was physically, struggling. But anyway, but I remember having a conversation with her about that verse. Children are an heritage unto the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. And so the idea that God gives children as a reward, and he gives it to people that we often think are unworthy. I've told you also many times, my sister, who wanted a child more than anything in the world, she's never able to have children. And we've talked about it many, many, many times. And often one of the things that people struggle with is that if they can't have children, they look around and they see people who they think, well, look at that person, and they have a drug addiction and they are in this bad circumstance, and yet the Lord gives them children. Why does that happen? And I can't speak to every situation. I can't. But I know this, that I had people say that to me. In fact, I had that pastor's wife who said that to that girl. She also said something similar to me when I was having Brianna. She didn't understand how I could have so many children, and I clearly hadn't always been in good situations, and yet she couldn't have any, and she was pastor's wife. And what she was saying was, I am so good and you are so bad. Why do you deserve a child? And the thing is that God knows who he wants to give children to. And God designs each child, and God designs each mother, and he puts them in unique situations. Now, for the record, God was very, very good to that pastor's wife. And one of the things I said to her at that time was, I don't know what plans God has for you, but I know he cares about you, and I know he cares about children. And I think that there, may come a time you have to lean on him and talk to him about it. And they ended up adopting a young lady who ended up being about the same age as Brianna. And I said to her at the time, I said, "You know what? Remember when we were having that conversation and you were really upset about me having a baby and you hadn't been able to have a baby?" I said, "But what you didn't know was at that time, they adopted from another country." I said, "At that time, the Lord was preparing a woman halfway across the world to have a baby that was going to be delivered to you and you were going to raise." That's not the plan that you had for having children, but that was the plan that God had for you to have children. He didn't leave you childless. He just prepared that baby elsewhere. And so I'm not saying that the Lord doesn't give children to people that might go to another person, but that's his call. He puts children, that says the fruit of the womb is his reward. He puts them where he desires them to be. And the idea is that people would see each child that he gives them as that reward, as that gift. Very much like right here in this verse where David is talking about this king who's coming in and God is giving him this great blessing. He's like, "Listen, stop in your tracks." This king wants to keep going. He's going in a direction that he desires, but God stops him in his tracks and said, "I have a blessing to give you, a crown of gold." And I think that this is the thing, that a lot of times people have this idea of children as being a burden, as being a negative thing. Carrie, I think you said something about how you thought children were a burden. I want to say it was you who said it, because Carrie commented on my post. And I think that many people have that thought in their head, that children are a burden and not a blessing, when God calls them a reward, right? And so you have this king who's coming in and God stops him. And it's like we're going through our lives and we think that God is stopping us and giving us this burden. But God is stopping us and he's giving us a blessing. He wants to give us joy and peace and all of the good things, and all of those things we just have to see them that way. We have to honor them as something that he has given us that's precious, that's beautiful, right? So God stops him and he's giving him this blessing, giving him this crown. And verse 4, I think, is tremendous. It says, "He asked life of thee," talking about the king who asked of the Lord for life. "And thou gavest it him, even length of days forever and ever." We all want the Lord to bless us with long, healthy lives. We want to be able to enjoy our family and our life and our friends and all of those things. And what we would ask for ourselves is life, and it doesn't make sense that we would want to deprive someone else of that. It just doesn't. I mean, it's the greatest thing that we could give someone else, and it's the worst thing that we could take from someone. So it doesn't even make sense that we would want to take it from people who aren't born yet, as far as I'm concerned. Verse 5 says, "His glory is great in thy salvation. Honor and majesty hast thou laid upon him." And of course, this is the king's glory, which is great. Like, the king is going to be glorified because God has saved him and saved the people, right? It says God has given him honor and majesty. So when the king returns to his kingdom and he's been victorious, all of the people are rejoicing, and they're thinking that they're giving the king honor. They're giving the king majesty, right? But the idea is that his glory is great because of God's salvation. And so any time that you have these successes, you have to remember that you might be the one who's received. Like, we have a lot of people who say things to us about us being good parents, or we have a lot of people saying that our marriage is an inspiration, which to me is crazy, because if you lived in our house, we just have a regular marriage, y'all. I'm just going to be honest with you. We have struggles this year in particular. I'm going to be honest with you. It's just the two of us. We don't have the kids as a buffer anymore. And it doesn't feel like an inspirational marriage sometimes. It just feels like a regular marriage. But you know what? The reason why we have any kind of honor or majesty laid on us is not because Rick and I are because if you were in our household, you'd be like, I don't know about that. But but the reason why is because the Lord has given us victories. You know, it is by God's grace. I'm gonna tell you right now, because I told you we were young and absolutely a mess when we got these kids. And it is God's grace that every one of those kids has grown up and are functioning adult. If you knew the mess I was, if you knew the mess my kids are not perfect, but you know what? Psh, they aren't anywhere near as bad as I was. Nowhere near. I'm really glad they didn't have social media when I was young. I'm just going to be honest with you. But the reason why we have any honor, the reason why anyone would look at us and think, oh, you guys did such a great job, is not because we wrought this great victory. It's because God did. You know, any success, I've said this before, any successes that we've had are because we've followed God's ways. There's no doubt about it. Any failures are our fault. I totally, I'll take that. That is a fact. But this king, he's getting this honor and majesty because God has given him the victory. Says verse 6, for thou hast made him most blessed forever. Thou hast made him exceeding glad with thy countenance. And again, all of the great things that we have are because the Lord has bestowed them on us. And this is just one of those times that we have to see and recognize God is working. Because a lot of times we'll walk through our lives and not think that he's there. You know, we'll see all of the problems and all of the struggles, and we'll think to ourselves, does God see us? Is he working? Can he help? And we'll pray and we'll ask him, but we'll think that salvation is afar off, the Lord, not the salvation of Christ, but the salvation saving us from all of these difficulties. We'll think that it's afar off with it's our lot to struggle. But yet God is there and he is working. He's made us most blessed forever. Made us exceeding glad with his countenance. When he shows his face like he is now, we're exceeding glad because it's good things. Things that are just absolute blessings. Things that change lives. Verse 7, for the king trusted in the Lord, and through the mercy of the Most High, he shall not be moved. And that's the key. That's the key right there. This is why the king had victory. Because he trusted in the Lord. And by God's mercy, he was not going to be moved. So many times we get in the middle of battles and we don't feel like we're winning. We don't feel like it's even possible to win, like this battle that we've been in. And as we go through the battle, we just got to trust the Lord. I mentioned the other day, been a few weeks, about a lady that I know, that I follow on Instagram, and her son has cancer, and they've been going through treatments. And I know that while she was going through this battle, she did not know how the battle was going to turn out. But what she had to do was every day get up, deal with whatever that day was, and trust in the Lord. Just day by day. Day by day, trust in the Lord and go through the battle. And that's what I'm sure it's like on the actual battlefield that David was talking about. Every day, get up, trust in the Lord, fight the battle. And it was through his mercy that she wasn't moved. You know, she was there. She didn't give up. They kept going. Now, praise the Lord, his cancer's in remission. And you might be going through a battle. You might be going through difficulty. You know, I mentioned Rick and I said this year's been a challenging year. And there are days where we get up and we just fight the battle to keep it together. And by God's mercy, we're not moved. You know what I mean? We just keep going, and we're going to keep going by God's grace. That's all I got to say about that one. But you might have a battle. I mean, other people have health struggles, other people have relationship struggles, other people have financial struggles. And sometimes you just have to. This was a struggle that was, I think, the one that I'm talking about in terms of this battle with our country. You know, this is a struggle that we've been going through for years, walking day by day, praying and asking the Lord to make a change. And look, by His mercy, we aren't moved, and He's done the work. So that's how He dealt with the king, those first 7 verses. But then you have verses 8 through 13, and it talks about how the Lord deals with enemies. You know, you see, the first part of this chapter is the king. And, you know what? Hold on one second. See, this is what happens when I'm by myself. I forget to plug things in, and I don't want the laptop to go down. Hold on. Okay, it was a good time to pause there, so that was okay. Just when you think you've plugged all of the things in, you haven't. So you have this great contrast between this king who trusts God, who's walking with Him, who is blessed, and God has helped him and given him this great victory and the salvation. And then you have the contrast with the enemies. They're not the king's enemies, mind you. You know, the king was the one fighting the battle, and he might have been up against the king, but the way the Bible characterizes it is it's not the king's enemy, it's God's enemy, right? So when you fight these battles, if you're on God's side, and I think that's the key, right? This is the idea of the difference between someone who's trusting the Lord in their victory and someone who's just doing what they want, you know? When you're on God's side, then the enemy that you're battling isn't your enemy, it's His enemy. In which case, He's the one fighting the battle and not you, and you can feel confident in it, right? So, verse 8 says, "Thine hand shall find out all thine enemies. Thy right hand shall find out those that hate thee." And of course, this is talking about God. This isn't the king that's going to find out the ones that hate him. This is God who's going to find out those that hate him. He's going to discover them. You know, there's nothing that's hidden from God. People might think they're being subversive. And, you know, for instance, you know, we don't know all the enemies that we have. A lot of the stuff that we do is online. And I actually, I've mentioned before that there are like gossip sites out there that talk about a lot of people that are online. And we discovered one that talks about us. And of course, on the gossip site, people use fake names. Always got to have a fake name because, you know, you don't want to be out there and actually tell people what you actually think, right? But we didn't know who they were. They talk about us, talk about our family. Every once in a while, we'll check on it and see what they're saying. Sometimes we laugh at it. Sometimes we shake our head because they say things that are just, they think they know what they don't know a thing about what they're talking about. Ridiculous. But anyway, they all use fake names. But one day, one person with a fake name said something, and I knew who they were. I knew exactly who they were. And I knew it because based on something that they said, and I remembered that conversation. I knew exactly who it was, even though I had a fake name. And it wasn't even that fake. I was able to tell who it was from it. I wasn't looking to discover who anyone was. Frankly, I didn't care. You can talk about my family online all you want. Whatever. But once I found out who this person was, and this person was talking particularly, if I remember correctly, it's been a little while, I think they were talking about my daughter. And they came to my page, and so I maybe it wasn't, I really tried to be gracious about it, but I essentially told them that they were not welcome on my page anymore. People always feel like they're hurting my feelings when they say, "Well, I'm unfollowing you." And I'm like, "Boo, go ahead." I mean, I don't need more haters in my life. Okay. So, but anyway, but there are a lot of times there are people that I don't even know who they are. You know, they're out there, they hate us. Okay. I don't know them. A lot of times they're my enemy though, because of the stand I take on things that are biblical. We got a lot of those. And I mean, I'm going to live my life. That's all I got to do. I don't need to know who they are. If they are my enemy because I'm following the Lord, then like I said, that makes them God's enemy. They're not really mad at me. They're mad at God's stand. They're mad that I'm on his side. And so I don't need to know who they are. The Lord knows who they are, right? It says, thy hand shall find out thy enemies. Thy right hand shall find out those that hate thee. I don't need to stress out about all these people that are out. A lot of people don't do things online because they're worried about all the hate. And don't get me wrong, it's kind of a thorn in the flesh. but at the same time, you just can't worry yourself about it because if they hate you because of the Lord, they're his enemy. And I don't need to discover who all of them are. God knows who they are. And he'll handle his business. And I got to handle what he tells me to do. You know what I mean? So the king didn't have to worry about all those details. God was handling it. Verse 9 says, now, in fact, let me read verses 9 and 10 together. This is how God's dealing with them. Thou shalt make them as a fiery oven in the time of thine anger. The Lord shall swallow them up in his wrath. The fire shall devour them. Their fruit shall thou destroy from the earth, and their seed from among the children of men. God is going to destroy them utterly. Frankly, I think this is why the Bible encourages us to love our enemies and do good to them that are not doing good to us, because ultimately God does love everyone and he does want everyone to be saved. But those who set themselves up against him as his enemy, the destruction that they're facing is so. Haven't you ever had this statement said, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy? And if you really know the wrath of God, you wouldn't wish that on your worst enemy. I mean, think of the things that have happened to you in your life that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. The wrath of God is not something that you want anyone to deal with. And this is why we have to be good to people, even when they're not good to us. Because they have to see a good God. Because they've set him up in their mind as the enemy. And they have to see, and they're only going to see it through you. You know, you have to be faithful and do your part to represent the Lord, give him glory, so that your enemies might turn. You know, our country is very divided right now with this whole legal situation. And it's not going to do any good to be hateful to other people. You know, I'm staunchly pro-life. But that doesn't mean that I don't have pity and great understanding for people who care about other people who are struggling with that decision because of their difficult circumstances. I have great pity for that. I do. I get asked all the time, well, what about rape? And what about if the mom is dying? And I have not had to face those situations, so I can't answer that. But I know people who have. You know, my very good friend Shakima has been very open and honest about the circumstances leading up to the birth of her oldest child. She has a post about it. I even shared it yesterday, where she was raped by a family member. I want to say she was 12 or 13. Do you guys know? Some of you guys follow her. Let me know if you know in the comments, the chat. But and she could not. She actually had considered an abortion at that time, but could not because she was so far along by the time they figured it out. And she's so thankful that she never even had to consider the option, because you know, the blessing that her daughter, who is a teacher, who affects the lives of so many children, who's a great blessing to her, who's working on her doctorate, she's making a great impact in the world. And Shakima talks about how God redeemed such a bad situation. Now, I have not walked through that situation, but Shakima has, and I see her and I see the great work that God has done in the midst of a tremendously difficult circumstance. And I think, if God can do that for her, God can do that for anybody. And when I think about women who are choosing to live, you know, between their life and their child's life, that to me, honestly, is such a hard thing. But I've told the story before. There was a woman, and I never met her. I met her husband and her children within a couple of months after she died. And I heard her story through them. But she had cancer, and they could have she was pregnant. She had 5 children. And she could have aborted her child and gotten treatment and possibly lived. And she and her husband, and I've heard his testimony, he said that they talked about it, and she said that she would die for that child, that she was not going to kill one of her children just so she could live. She just couldn't do that. And so she decided to have the baby, and then they would deal with cancer treatment, and she would come what may. She would deal with that. Well, she passed away. She had the baby. She passed away. And her husband was left with all of her children grieving. And while I saw it after the fact, I'm amazed at the strength of this woman to make that choice, trusting that while she wasn't going to be there to raise her children, that God would ensure that her children were cared for. And the Lord brought into their lives, the husband was not at all interested in getting married again. He was just absolutely grieving and devastated and just completely not in that space at all when we met him. But there was a young woman that came along. I mean, not super young, but a youngish woman. And she was the oldest of 12 children. And somehow they met up and ended up getting married. And she ended up raising this woman's children. And now they're married and they have their own children, that they're missionaries going to another country. And I think about how I honestly would not have been brave enough to make that decision. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think I would have. I don't think I would have been brave enough if I had been given a choice. And yet the strength and the trust in the Lord of this woman is just amazes me. And I see the daughter, because the baby that she had was a daughter. And I see this little girl running around, and she's just the sweetest, most beautiful child you ever saw. And I think about the choice that she had to make, and she would have literally had to say, kill my child or kill me. And she said, kill me. And I think that she saw the vision of this child running around while the child was still in her womb. Because I think if you see your child running around, what mother would say, well, kill the child and leave me because I got stuff to do? Any good mother who loves their child is like, kill me. Let my child live. You know what I mean? And so while I have complete pity and empathy for people in those circumstances, because I myself know that I would not necessarily be able to make good choices if I were given the chance, I see these people who had the strength and the trust in God to go through those difficulties and make those choices that were on God's side, and how the Lord worked and made those situations turn out for good. And I think that's why we have to trust him, because the decisions that we would make wouldn't necessarily be the best if we're making decisions in our flesh, right? And so these people who have made themselves God's enemies that are going against him, the end result is their destruction. You can't go against God's ways and think that you're going to win. It's like Adam and Eve when they were eating the fruit in the garden. God told them one thing, and they took the fruit, and they thought they had gotten away with it because they didn't die immediately. But what they didn't know was death had already passed on them. The destruction was coming, and not just for them, their entire seed. Everything that God said here was true in the garden. God's word is true. And so you can't go against his way and think that there's going to be blessing. You have to follow him if you are going to have good things. So these people that have set themselves up as God's enemies are going to be destroyed. And we have to make sure that we are on God's side so that we aren't in that enemy camp. Verse 11 says, "For they intended evil against thee," that's they intended evil against God. "They imagined a mischievous device, which they are not able to perform. Therefore thou shalt make them turn their back, when thou shalt make ready thine arrows upon thy strings against the face of them." They're going to turn and run. They intended evil. They even came up with this mischievous device, thinking that they were going to get a win. I think Satan came up with this whole idea of, killing children and trying to twist it and make it something that's good and valuable and helpful to society, when it's just the saddest thing to make the choice to kill your own children. I mean, that is a place of desperate sadness. A place of desperate sadness. And Satan intended it for evil against God. Because like I said earlier, he knows the curse is that the seed of the woman is what is going to crush his head. He knows that. He intended evil. But it says God is going to make them turn their back. He's going to make them run once he gets started fighting this battle. Don't think you see the enemy coming at you and you think to yourself, what am I going to do? We're in this battle. And I always forget if it's Elijah or Elisha, but you remember the story? We haven't gotten it on this Bible study, but I'm sure if you've been in church for a while, you've heard it. Where he's up in the top of the building with Eleazar, the servant. And Eleazar is freaking out because he sees the armies that are coming towards them to get them. And he's like, what are we going to do? And he prays and he said, Lord, open his eyes. And then all of a sudden he sees the host of heavenly armies that are gathered around them. The Lord is there and he is protecting them. And there is no need to worry. And so you might see the enemy coming at you. You might see, I think a lot of people are living in a lot of fear right now, seeing enemies coming at them. And they're really concerned. But the question isn't, like I said before, whether or not there are enemies. There's always going to be enemies. The question is whether or not we are on God's side. And if we're on God's side, have no fear. Open your eyes. He's there. He's working. He's fighting these battles. If he were not fighting these battles, we would have been destroyed by now. But he's there, fighting, preserving, saving. As he always says, the Bible calls him our strong tower. And again, this is after the battle. The Lord has wrought this great work, making the enemies turn and run. And it's going to keep going. Verse 13, I know I'm almost at the hour. Be thou exalted, Lord, in thine own strength. So will we praise and sing and praise thy power. The Lord is exalted. He's lifted up in his own strength. All of these victories are happening because God is strong, because he is working, he is making things happen. And because of that, we can sing and praise his power. I said at the beginning that this is the opportunity for us to be out there talking about this, praising him. Not a time for silence, guys. Let's please don't be silent. Please don't be silent. I think one of the great travesties of this is so many people are silent, and that is why there are a lot of people. I think somebody said this in the comments, the idea, forgive them for they know not what they do. There are a lot of people out there, Maureen said that. There are a lot of people out there who just really don't understand. They don't. They don't understand God's perspective. And why would they? They're not believers. We need to be gracious and have pity and remember that our job, where we have failed as believers, is not telling them about the Lord. If they knew the Lord, the Holy Spirit would speak to them and they would understand. They would understand that while there are situations that still need work, why we feel staunchly that there's still not a good reason to kill children. You know what I mean? That doesn't solve everything. But that's something that's, as far as I'm concerned, black and white. We've got to praise the Lord. We've got to be bold. We've got to share his truth. We've got to rejoice in his victories. And we've got to show people that he's there, that he's real, that he is working, and that if they want to be blessed, they need to get on his side too. We've got to show them that he loves them. He has their best interests at heart. He's always known them from the time that they were knit together in their mother's womb, and he wants good. But God gave us that task, and we have to put it out there. This is not a time for silence. This is a time for us to, like I said, be bold and speak and praise. And how else was it put? Sing, exalt him, lift him up. God has wrought a great victory. We've won a tremendous battle. And so this is the time for us to get out there and really let people know who God is and how he's working and how we trust him, and let them see the victory. And as such, the Lord is going to continue to bless, continue to grow his kingdom, and we are all going to be brought together. There's going to be more unity, less of all of this divisiveness. It's not going to come because we convince people with arguments about what we think is right and what we think is wrong. It's going to come because people learn to trust the Lord. And so that's the kind of thing that we need to share and put out there. So Psalm 21, after the battle, David has wrought this great victory, but it was the Lord who really won it. And it's time to praise him. So let's go ahead and close in a word of prayer. That's what we have for today. And thank you guys for joining me. Lord, I just want to thank you for the battles that you've been fighting behind the scenes that I just didn't know about, and Lord, didn't even have any kind of faith that you would be fighting those battles. And yet, Lord, you are faithful. You're working. You care for us. You care for your people. You care for your children. And Lord, you're doing great and mighty things, which we know not. And I just thank you for your faithfulness in spite of our faithlessness. And Lord, I pray that you would continue to help us to trust you and follow you, Lord. And I pray that we would be able to be bold and tell others about you and tell people about the great victories. And Lord, that you would open their eyes and that they would see that killing children is not the solution. Lord, they've been blinded for a very long time. And I just pray that you would open their eyes. I pray that you would bless each and every person that listens. Help them to grow closer to you, Lord, and have them have many victories and battles as they fight on your side. I pray that you would bring us back together tomorrow so that we could gather around your word again. And I pray that you would give us all a safe and quiet and encouraging evening. In Christ's name we pray, amen. Okay, guys, that's it. I can't tell you how excited I am about the days to come. I'm really blessed by seeing God's work and how he is just there. So many times we just don't see him in everyday life, but I'm seeing him so much right now, and I hope you are too. Tomorrow we are doing Psalm 22, Lord willing. And does this sound familiar? My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Does that sound familiar? That's Psalm 22. That's one of the prophecies of Christ on the cross, and that's a really tremendous section. And frankly, I'm excited to hear my husband talk about it. So come back tomorrow, and Lord willing, Rick will be here. It will be a tremendous passage in the Old Testament that points to the Messiah, points to Christ, and just reveals God's plan in the Old Testament to David. It's like unbelievable the things that God was doing there. So anyway, you all have a wonderful night. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye.